Okay, welcome back to a random walk down Mill Street. I see we have a nice group of people. Some of you were regulars before the holidays. A few people I don't recognize all your names, but it's great to have you. This, for those of you who haven't been to a random walk down Mill Street before, the reason it's called a random walk down Mill Street is because it's random. One week we could be talking about history. One week we could talk about minhagim. One week we could talk about liturgy, music. It varies from week to week. I plan mostly to be doing this class every other week here right here on Zoom. Okay, let's go to this week's topic. And I want to just make sure, Diane or somebody can tell me if you can see my screen with the cover page on it. Great, excellent. Okay, too long have I dwelt with those who hate peace. You try to make this a little bit smaller. David de Sola and the Nebi Musa riots of 1920. I don't know how many of you know about this topic. I didn't know all that much, and I do not claim to be an expert. But as usual, the starting point of this topic is something found in the archives of Shearith Israel. Now, why did I choose this topic for this week? I think is fairly obvious. We find ourselves, I don't know about you, but if you're, I might guess that you are having the same problems I have, in that it's hard to pull yourself away from reading the news about Israel. The war in Israel is all-consuming. Every day I check the news. I get headlines from Times of Israel and WhatsApp groups, and I find it hard to stop what they call doom scrolling, just going through all the news all the time. Here at Shearith Israel, we have been reciting Tehillim every day at synagogue during services. And on Shabbat, we have a special Misha Berach we're making for soldiers in Tzahal and in the IDF. And we actually also recite the names of those soldiers in the IDF who are serving, who are related or otherwise connected to members of our congregation. And it's a long list. There's last week there were 101 names. Tells me my internet is unstable, which is a little confusing. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Last week we had 101 names, and this week it'll be more, as people realize what we are doing. And the reason I mention here is to show how everyone is affected. Everyone knows someone who has been affected. Tragedy struck my own family, and my cousin's son Yosef was killed. And it'll affect everyone in some fashion. We all have connections to those who are in Israel, and our prayers are with them, and our thoughts are with them. And I actually, to be just perfectly honest, I've had trouble concentrating at work, getting away from the news of Israel. So I thought, I have to give a class. Let me make it about something related to Israel. And this is the topic that I came up with, again, based on something found in Shearith Israel's archives. So to show you what that thing is before we get into it in detail, it's this. There is a headline in something called a periodical called The New Palestine for the restoration and upbuilding of a Jewish Palestine, dated May 28th, 1920. And the headline reads, Medical Unit Faces Snipers, Bullets in Jerusalem Riots. And right under that is a picture of Dr. David de Sola. And it says there, who was arrested and imprisoned for several hours by the English military authorities while performing valiant services in rescuing and caring for the wounded in the Jerusalem riots. So this was intriguing to me. I thought I'd have to learn a little more about it, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about tonight. I'm not going to get into a great deal of Zionist history, but it would be useful for this class to review some of the timeline of the creation of the state of Israel, the modern state of Israel, and the Zionist movement that led to it. So just quickly, and I'm no expert, it's really just sort of touching on the highlights. For 400 some odd years, you have the rule of the Ottoman Empire, and now modern day Turkey. We don't need to make any assessments about it, but that's who was in control of the area we now call Israel, the land of Israel. And as you know, the old Yishuv really begins, the settlement, the modern settlement of Israel starts to take greater, movement beginning the mid to late 19th century. We have the creation of Mishkanot Sha'ananim. You have the introduction of funds from Judah Turo and Moses Montefiore, and the creation of neighborhoods outside of the old city. And then by the end of the 19th century, you have the Zionist Conference and Theodor Herzl and Zionism proper. By the way, we have Sheretz Israel has connections to that movement as well. I think I've mentioned in the past, Henry Pera Mendes was a very ardent, our minister was a very, very ardent Zionist. He attended the first Zionist Congress. He was charged by Herzl to bring Zionism to America and was an ardent Zionist his whole life. Then you get World War I, and the Ottoman Empire aligns with Germany, and that means the end of the Ottoman Empire. During World War I, you have Lord Balfour in England, who supports the establishment of the creation of a Jewish homeland in Israel, and that's what leads ultimately to the creation of the state, but not before a bumpy period. So in 1920, so what happens is the World War I ends, the Ottoman Empire is no more. There is a conference called the San Remo Conference, where all the Allied powers meet, France, England, and they divvy things up. And Britain gets the land of Israel, Palestine, and the Transjordan also, and France gets the area of Syria and Lebanon. And the groundwork for the Balfour Declaration to become a reality is now clear. And then in 1922, that actually gets official recognition by the League of Nations, and they create a Palestine and a Transjordan, and the British Mandate Palestine is meant to encompass the area for the Jews, and the Transjordan is supposed to be an area for the Arabs, and that's the way they envision the future going. By the way, we're not going to get into a great detail. It's not even a part of this story exactly, or maybe it is, or maybe it isn't. During World War I, in fighting the Ottoman Empire, the British enlisted the help of Lawrence of Arabia, right? T.E. Lawrence. And they basically promise the Arabs that there will be, with the destruction of the Ottoman Empire, there will be some kind of self-determination, some kind of Arab nationalism. And that begins Arab nationalism, which unfortunately, for the last 100 years or more, somehow conflicts with Jewish nationalism, but that's a topic beyond today, other than minor points. So then we have, through the 20s, we have some riots, which we will talk about today. You have the creation of the Hebrew University. You have Jewish immigration, which becomes a threat to the British Mandate, so they limit it, and during the White Paper, terrible times, right when it's needed most. And then you have the Holocaust, and then you have the creation of the state of 1947 and the end of the British Mandate. And the reason I'm going through this is just to give you a little sense of timeline. The time that we're going to talk about is from 1919 to 1922, the period of time that happens to be when our minister, David de Sola Pool, leaves his job here in New York, goes to work for the Joint Distribution Committee, the Jewish Joint Distribution Committee in Palestine, administering the Balfour Commission as an administrator for the Balfour Commission, and distributing funds on behalf of the JDC in Palestine, in British Mandate Palestine. And that's what we're talking about. That's why I went through this little timeline. After, in 1922, he comes back to Sheretz Israel. He's recalled back to be the minister, and has a long career, storied career, almost legendary career to those of us who grew up in the synagogue. And maybe we'll talk about some of those legends another time. But here we're going to talk about a very small period of his life. So before he goes to Israel, I just want to show you a little bit that Dr. Poole was not not new to Zionism. He had written papers and delivered lectures about Zionism and Judaism. And here on the left, you'll see an article from the New York Times from 1917. So it's during World War I. Symposium on Zionism. It's hard to imagine such a thing happening today, as you'll read it. Dr. Moskowitz opposes the movement. Dr. Poole defends it. Dr. Henry Moskowitz, Dr. David DeSola Poole, and Dr. Maurice Harris discussed Zionism at a symposium on the Jewish question conducted at Temple Emmanuel last night. Dr. Moskowitz criticized the movement as romantic and impractical, and said that while he had no objection to Palestine as a refuge for dreamers, he thought the keeping alive of the Hebraic ideals at home was of far greater importance than the Zionist movement. Let's worry about us, the Jews in America. The idea of having a Jewish homeland in the land of Israel is a dreamer's fantasy. Dr. Poole, however, made a strong appeal for the colonization of Palestine as the only way to restore Hebrew ideals. So you can see he's an ardent Zionist. He thinks that the future of Judaism requires the creation of a state of Israel. I think history proves him right, basically, but anyway. That's Dr. Poole. During World War I, while he's a minister of Sheretz Israel, he's actually the assistant minister to Henry Paramendes, but he is delivering speeches, delivering lectures with the Zionist cause in mind. World War I comes. Dr. Poole is a very staunchly patriotic American. He becomes a chaplain in the United States Army. He also works for the Jewish Welfare Board, recruiting other chaplains and providing assistance to soldiers in World War I. And then as World War I is coming to a close, he starts working with the Jewish Welfare Board, which was really an American World War I Jewish military kind of aid society. He starts working with them to aid those who are in Palestine, in Israel, as the Ottoman Empire has collapsed, to help provide funds for them and whatnot, and help. And as you can see on the right, you'll see a letter or an article from the B'nai B'rith Messenger, March 21st, 1919. Chaim Weizmann, head of the Zionist Administration Commission, has announced that this body is spending $100,000 a month for the relief of distress in Jerusalem. Special attention being paid to the younger element of the community who are being assisted to become self-supporting. Points out that the effort of the Zionist Administration Commission was directed towards the creation of a self-reliant and dignified community. The budget of a $3 million restoration fund, which is being raised by the Zionist Organization of America, provides the sum of $1 million of loans to finance such enterprise as will give employment there and therefore self-respect to the Jews of Jerusalem. The London Zionist Bureau announces that it has received 200 applications for service in Palestine, including civil service employees, physicians, engineers, agronomists, teachers, etc. The American organization is represented by the personnel of the American Zionist Medical Unit and is being joined by Dr. David DeSola Poole of New York, Dr. Harry Friedenwald of Baltimore, Mr. Robert Salt of Washington, etc. So in 1919, they shift from World War I aid to Europe to aid to Palestine. And great funds are being raised in Europe and in America to help the community there. And Dr. Poole gets on board, and he leaves his job here at Sheretz Israel to go to Israel. By the way, he married his wife Tamar de Sola Tamar Hershenson in 1917, so he's only married for a few years. That might have contributed to his interest in going to Israel, since Tamar was born there, and the Hershensons were very, very staunch Zionists as well. In any case, he goes and he sees the building up of Palestine, British Mandate Palestine, as an imperative, and he goes to help. Man of action. And here is an article from June 14th, 1919. Beginning with the middle of May, the Jewish Welfare Board will send $2,000 a month to Palestine to be spent on welfare among Jewish legionnaires. Jewish legionnaires, these soldiers who have now settled in Palestine after World War I. This decision was taken by the Executive Committee of the Jewish Welfare Board after listening to a letter written by Dr. David de Sola Pool, now with the Zionist Commission in Jerusalem. Pool had been with the Jewish Welfare Board. Now he's with the Zionist Commission in Jerusalem. He has gone from being an American clergyman to working with the Balfour Commission. We have over here in Israel, writes Dr. Poole, 2,300 Jewish boys, nearly half of them in camps some miles from Jaffa, and nearly half of them in the desert between Palestine and Egypt. Among all these boys, there is practically no welfare work being done. Even writing paper and envelopes are usually not at their disposal. Reading material is also at a premium. The Zionist Commission has done something for these boys. It is helping to support the welfare houses in Jaffa, Jerusalem, and Haifa. It has supplied matzot, wine, etc. for the Seder. Remember, he's right. This is in June, so it's shortly after Pesach. It has supplied altogether spending $5,000 on the men, but very little indeed could be achieved for this sum. The legionnaires look for aid to America. Out of a total of 4,000 Jewish men, 2,300 are Americans. They have been here about 8 months and feel bitter at the way they have been overlooked, as they think by the folks at home. So Poole is raising money to support American young men, essentially probably soldiers or others who have moved to Palestine after World War I. Okay. Oh, I should go back. This is a picture of Dr. Poole. It's from 1920. I don't know exactly what I'm looking at here. I think it's probably in Israel, but what is most interesting is the uniform. This is the uniform of the I forgot already what it was called, the American Medical Unit of the JDC that was operating in British Mandate Palestine, and you can see on it here it has like a Magen David on his sleeve here, and it's a military type of uniform that he is wearing. So he goes to Israel, and he's not immune from kind of tourist activity. As you can see, he gets dressed up in local clothing for a tourist photo that he sends back home. But he also has he's also doing work. He's visiting different places, and this is a hospital tent that was set up on the shore of the Kinneret, it says on the back, by this group, by the American Medical Unit of the JDC that is operating in Palestine in 1920, and you can see him right here sitting, wearing a tie. The patient looks like he can barely stand up. No one's helping him. There's the nurse. I don't know exactly what's going on, but that's the photo that we have in our archives. Well, all these pictures come from our archive. And now we get to the incident that prompted the headline we saw at the beginning. So I want to show you a few things here. One on the left is the reporting of a riot in Jerusalem, and on the right is the reporting of a riot in Tel Chai, often called the Battle of Tel Chai. If you've heard that before, because you've studied the Zionist history, that is where Trumbull dies in this battle. And they both happen in March, April of 1920. What prompts this is basically the San Remo conference. The writing is on the wall that the British mandate, but that the Balfour Declaration, which was theoretical in 1917, is given more impetus and given more reality and the Arabs are upset. So here you have this is the article from the Times of London, April 8th, 1920. Jerusalem fight, melee with knives and stones. Cairo, April 6th. Beyond the bare announcement already published of a conflict between Jews and Muslims on April 4th, nothing further has been received from Jerusalem, which rather indicates that a censorship has been established. So they're admitting right away that they know very little. There's very little reporting being done, but they know something has happened. Travelers coming from Jerusalem state that fighting was resumed yesterday and that a number of casualties resulted. It must be admitted that trouble has been brewing for some time. Travelers say that the acuteness of the Arab feeling against the Jews is probably not realized in England. The religious festivals seem to have brought matters to a head. The Muslims have shown no hostility to the Christians. When Christian and Muslim processions on April 2nd almost met, that's Easter, I believe, not a word of his hostility was uttered. So there were processions going in the old city of Jerusalem. The Arab procession, the Christian procession met, nothing happened. The Muslim celebration of Nebi Musa lasts several days, and the Muslims come to Jerusalem from all quarters. Their processions began on the 2nd of April, the only noteworthy feature being a man heading the procession carrying a drawn sword. A number of Muslims came to Jerusalem from Hebron on April 4th. When the procession was approaching the Jaffa gate, the cry went up from outside the gate, "The Jews are attacking us." It is not known whether there was any foundation to the cry, but it started the trouble. The leading men in the Muslim procession surged toward the gate, while the remainder halted and attacked any Jew in the vicinity, shouting, "We won the country by the sword. We will keep the country by the sword." The Jews seem to have been prepared, for they were armed with knives. Fighting with knives and stones ensued. The roadway up to near the Jaffa gate, providing handy missiles in the shape of huge stones. British soldiers appeared at the height of the melee, and everything calmed down at once. The soldiers soon got procession moving on again by peaceful persuasion. Numerous casualties occurred. Subsequently, in the narrow byways of the town, collisions occurring wherever Jews were encountered. The latter fought determinedly, and casualties are probably evenly divided. 10 corpses were found, but the actual number of killed is not yet known. So this is an early report based on very little eyewitness reports, but this is the Nebi Musa riots of 1920 are something that's well known and studied, and are significant because this is essentially the start of the Haganah. This is the armed defense of Jewish settlement in British Mandate Palestine, with an eye towards Zionism, with an eye towards the partition agreement, with an eye towards a national homeland, begins here in 1920. And this melee, this Jerusalem fight, as the headline calls it, is what is referenced to that Dr. Poole found himself in midst in 1920. Now, just so you don't think that the article, don't believe everything you see, this is the Times of London, and it says, "Oh, the British soldiers calmed everything down right away. Everything was perfectly fine because they came in and broke it up." That's not really what happened. In fact, there were accusations that the British turned the other cheek, knew about it, and let the riots go on, or were so afraid for their own safety because there weren't that many British soldiers there that they left, they fled until they could come back later when things were calmed down. So there's a lot of, even, I wouldn't call it propaganda exactly, but they're painting the British soldiers in a better light than others would. Now, just to show you on the other side here is a later article from April 16th, but it refers to something that happened a month earlier. The news to hand, as your correspondent writes, that Emir Faisal, that's Hussein, that's the beginning of the Hussein dynasty here, has proclaimed himself king of Syria, may only be an intelligent anticipation of events to come, but it also ranks as a further attempt to force the hands of the great powers in these matters of the orderly breakup of the old Turkish Empire. The Emir Faisal is an Arab leader, and the above-mentioned news comes to hand at the same time as a telegram from Muzishkin to the Zionist organization. Meaning, he said, "Oh, we have no problem with the Balfour Declaration. We have no problem with the Jewish homeland. There's enough room for everybody." And suddenly, he declares himself the ruler of the whole land. This was sent from Jerusalem on March 4th and has been delayed in transit. It tells. Oh, I'm sorry. Now this is a. I'm sorry. That was Faisal. Now we have news from Israel. Telegram from Uzishkin to the Zionist organization in America. It tells how 200 Arab looters attacked Tel Chai, a small Jewish cooperative workmen's colony near Metula. It's all the way north. The Jewish casualties were 4 men, including Captain Trumbledore, and 2 girls killed and 5 wounded. After the combat, the Jews burnt and evacuated Tel Chai themselves and retired to the southwest. It is quite possible, of course, to make too much of an item of news of this kind, but in view of the intense efforts made by interested people in various countries to breed bad feeling in Syria and the adjacent countries, it may have far-reaching consequences. This is a very prescient statement by the reporter here. As I mentioned earlier, these riots happening in March and in April really set the tone for the relationship between Arabs and Jews in this small area until this very day. This is the start of it. This is the armed conflict starts here. There were issues, of course, before, but this is really where the Haganah starts. This is where defense of a Jewish homeland, a modern Jewish homeland in Israel, starts. So let's find out how Dr. Poole gets involved. I'll take a moment to look at the comments here. Okay, is he bareheaded? If yes, why? Okay. It's being recorded. I think. Did I start the recording? Yes, I think so. And so you'll be able to watch the rest later if you can't see it now. Okay. Okay, next slide. So this Jerusalem riot, the Nebi Musa riot of 1920, is pretty well documented, and there are pictures of it. And here is the Jaffa Gate, and you can see this is the procession. Here are British soldiers somewhere else overlooking, watching what's going on there. They retreated out of the city and to a hill nearby to watch what was going on. There's even video of the basically from inside the Jaffa Gate of the riot. I watched it. I was going to play some of it for you, but you don't really see much other than a great tumult of people moving very quickly, and so it's hard to know what's going on. You do see a couple people with swords, so you know something violent is happening, but you don't really know who's who and what's what. So I decided not to show it. But if you want to Google it, you can take a look. Jerusalem riots 1920 or Nebi Musa riots 1920, and you can actually watch video footage of that riot in the old city of Jerusalem. And here is the article that I mentioned at first. Medical unit faces sniper as bullets in Jerusalem riots. The heroism of nurses and doctors of the American Zionist Medical Unit in rescuing and taking care of the wounded during the anti-Jewish riots in Jerusalem was revealed for the first time when Emanuel Moll of the Zionist Society of Engineers, an eyewitness of the Jerusalem pogroms, gave the first full report of the outbreaks received in this country, in America, to the Zionist Organization of America. He has just returned from Palestine, where he was engaged in Zionist engineering and reconstruction work. This was May 29, 1920. The riot or pogrom took place April 4th through 7th of 1920. So this is the end of May. The riots broke out at 10 o'clock on Easter Sunday morning, and within half an hour, the first wounded had been brought to the nurses and doctors in the medical units hospital in the new section of the city from the scene of the disturbances in Old Jerusalem. I never saw such bravery or devotion to duty as these American men and women displayed. Part of them had to stay in the hospital to receive and attend the wounded. The rest were on the go constantly for 2 days, rushing at breakneck speed through the streets in their trucks and ambulances, gathering up the wounded and rushing back to the hospital. All the nurses and doctors were on duty for 36 to 40 hours without any sleep or meals, and even then, after the let-up, they had to be forced to eat and get some rest. Mr. Mole told how the nurses and doctors rushed right into the midst of the rioters and carried away the injured. English officers would not enter the old town for fear of snipers and would not permit their soldiers to enter either. Yet the nurses walked boldly in and carried out the wounded. The red six-pointed Star of David, worn by all members of the unit, that's what we saw in his uniform earlier, and becomes Magen David Adom, the symbol as well, worn by all members of the unit, combined with their resolute and determined courage in facing every danger, protected them. For not once were any of them molested by the Arab rioters, he continued. Part of this was due to the admiration and wonderment of their heroism that their heroism produced. One striking case of heroism I never will forget was when 3 nurses walked straight through a crowd of threatening and menacing Arabs surrounding a house and walked out with 4 old women and 2 old men and several children. The nurses, with heads erect and eyes flaming, walked straight through the ring of Arabs who melted away from them and led the frightened old people and children to a synagogue. Another common sight, according to Mr. Mole, was to see the nurses forming volunteer firefighting squads, pumping water from wells by hand and extinguishing the blazing synagogues which the Arabs had fired. On several occasions, he saw nurses enter the burning synagogues and emerge with sacred scrolls of the law. One striking feature of the outbreak, showing the broad spirit permeating the work of the unit, which has treated Arab and Jew alike since it was established, was the fact that injured Arab rioters were brought to the Zionist hospital by unit workers. They didn't care who was injured, they just got them out of there. Lewis Cantor, formerly of Rochester, New York, chief sanitarian of the Zionist unit, was among the first to rush to the rescue of the old men and women who were the chief victims of the Arab rioters. Reverend Dr. David de Sola Poole, formerly of Temple, Shereth Israel, New York, bravely penetrated to the old city where most of the trouble took place, rescuing old men and women and children, salvaging the ornaments of the holy scrolls in the synagogues, and directing the work of the nurses and physicians in succoring the wounded and bringing out the dead. Coming out of the old town was a party of 50 refugees. He was placed under arrest by the British officer in command, notwithstanding a military pass issued to him by the governor, Colonel Storrs. He was locked up for 4 hours and then led by 2 soldiers with drawn bayonets to the German colony, where Colonel Betty, the brigade commander, tore up his pass and sent him on to Colonel Storrs, who released him. Reverend Poole credits his release to the intervention of the American consul, who says did everything in his power to protect American members of the unit and the Zionist Commission and the institutions financed by the Zionist organizations and the Joint Distribution Committee. So he thanks all the people who helped release him. Many were the members of the unit who distinguished themselves during the riots, among those particularly mentioned being Dr. Israel Biskind of Cleveland, Dr. Gerhard Schreibman of New York, Miss Bertha Feingold of Pittsburgh, head nurse, and Miss Ray Mallon of New York. By the way, Miss Feingold, the head nurse, is actually the person in the picture. Let's see if I can go back. Nope, I went too far. This is Miss Feingold, the head nurse. Dr. Poole, and that's before the riots. Okay, so now we know what happened. That's the story. But then a little later, we get Dr. Poole telling his own story, which I think is quite interesting also to see how it matches or doesn't match. Mostly matches. Dr. Poole recites his experiences in Palestine. Palestine can be made once more into a land of milk and honey, according to Dr. David de Sola Poole, former rabbi of Congregation Shereth Israel of the city, who has just returned from over a year spent in Palestine as a member of the Zionist Commission. All plans, he's coming back to report on how it's going, and so he's going to be very positive. All plans for the restoration of the country, including the engineering and the reclamation projects of the Zionists, investments of large amounts of capital in industries and commerce and other progress in the development of the Jewish national homeland, can be undertaken as soon as Turkey signs the Treaty of Peace, which grants Great Britain a mandate over Palestine for the express purpose of establishing a Jewish national homeland there. The signing of the treaty will mean the establishment of civil government in Palestine instead of the temporary military administration, first Turkish and then English, which has control of the land since the outbreak of the war. Herbert Samuel, former Secretary of State for Home Affairs, according to reports from London, is scheduled to assume the office of High Commissioner as soon as on July 1st. Palestine can most readily acquire a world market in those products such as Jaffa oranges, Jewish rugs, art craft articles, olives and their derivative, olive oil, soap, wines, almonds, grapes, and grape jelly, which it produces as well or better than any other country. Dr. Poole continued, in Hebrew printing and book publishing, as well as in other essentially Jewish products, Palestine should lead the world. A great advance is already promised in Hebrew printing. There are immediate possibilities in agriculture and its byproducts, but in establishing or reestablishing many other industries, persons investing in capital must spend their first 2 or 3 years in building up and developing their business. Because ancient Palestine is economically a young country. That's a little cute little phrase. Dr. Poole paid a glowing tribute to the work of the Joint Distribution Committee in its relief and reconstruction work among the poor and war-stricken Jews of Palestine, and the American Zionist Medical Unit in its fight against disease. There is markedly less malaria in Palestine today because of the work of the American Medical Unit. The American doctors of the unit set standards of modern expert medical service which had never before existed in Palestine. They introduced the specialist, unknown except in the case of the treatment of the eye before in Palestine. It was encouraging to observe how local physicians eagerly learned modern, up-to-date methods of the American doctors and surgeons. The joint distribution through its relief work carried on by funds raised from American Jews has kept tens of thousands of Jews alive in Palestine, according to Dr. Poole. Starvation following the wake of World War I would have swept parts of the country, but for the accomplishments of the committee, whose relief work is still imperatively necessary, but which is now developing more along reconstructive lines. Some of the principal relief measures now carried on are medical and sanitary work, loans to artisans, workmen, and small shopkeepers, which enable them to resume their productive position from before the war. Workshops throughout the country, combined with technical schools where sewing, lacework, and carpentry are taught, training in stone hewing, whereby material and workmen are being prepared in anticipation of the building boom that will soon come to Palestine, and employment bureaus to relieve the shortage of houses and give employment loans have also been made to repair houses damaged by the war, which are repaid by the rent. Commenting on the recent Arab-Jewish outbreaks in Jerusalem, which he declared were fomented by a few self-interested politicians. I think, but he means this was Faisal Hussein. Dr. Poole said, between the Crusades and 1919, there was never even any suspicion of trouble between the Jews and Arabs in Palestine. That might be debatable, but that was what he says. Palestine was one of the very few places in the world where the Jews were not troubled by their neighbors. But as a result of the war, demoralization, and agitation of representatives of land exploiters and Arab peasant exploiters, there was a change, culminating in the Jerusalem pogrom, in which the naturally friendly Arabs became tools of these self-interested agitators. And here you have the optimism of Dr. Poole. The Arab is still friendly. The agitators shot their bolt with these outbreaks, and the same friendly relations which were so pronounced before the war are quickly coming back again. As Jewish colonization develops in the new homeland, the Arabs become better off because their fortunes are linked with those of the Jewish population, which is the progressive element of the population. Building up the waste places, public works, agriculture, new industries will all mean work and prosperity for the Arabs. most of whom have been reduced to a wretched standard of life by their inert and exploiting big landowners. That they appreciate the good fortune which the Jews have brought to them is shown by the fact that although agitators tried hard with the bait of loot to inflame the Arab villages against their neighboring Jewish colonies, there were no outbreaks at all there. One of the most interesting and significant political accomplishments in Palestine has been the recognition of Hebrew, along with English, French, and Arabic as one of the official languages. According to Dr. Poole, all official and public notices, government forms, etc., are printed in Hebrew as well as the other official languages. So I think Dr. Poole has said a bunch of things here. Some of them very prescient. That Israel has industry and can exploit it, and if it just needs funds, and if you are a man of means or a person of means who is looking to start a new business, come to Israel, and he gives a list of some things that are ready to go. Wine, he says, Jaffa oranges, soap, almonds, grapes, etc. Some of those things really did take off and wine in particular is a big industry. And of course, maybe it's obvious, but Hebrew printing and Jewish articles mainly come from Israel, in the whole world today. So in that respect, he was very prescient. But he was very, I don't know, what's the right word? Overly optimistic that the relations between Arabs and Jews would normalize in time. I think that shows. Even though he had been in the thick of it and saw these riots firsthand, he did not lose his hope for a peaceful future. And that's Dr. Poole's story. While still in oops, let me put that away. While still in, how do I close that? Okay. While still in Israel, before coming back to share with Israel, he was there for a lot of interesting things. One of the pictures you see on the top left is a picture from our archives that Dr. Poole sent back to New York. And you can see it's Winston Churchill, and he's planting a tree at the future site of Hebrew University on Mount Scopus. Here's Winston Churchill here. And if you take a look here, here's Dr. Poole. Here's right here. Pretty close. I think this is Rabbi Cook, and I think this is the Sephardic chief rabbi, among other dignitaries. I think that's Herbert Samuel. You have a lot of Zionist figures and early Jewish Jerusalem figures all here, and Dr. Poole's not that far away. And here's a quote from Winston Churchill given right here at that table that you see here. Personally, my heart is full of sympathy for Zionism. This sympathy has existed for a long time, since 12 years ago when I was in contact with the Manchester Jews. I believe that the establishment of a Jewish national home in Palestine will be a blessing to the whole world, a blessing to the Jewish race scattered over the whole world, and a blessing to Great Britain. Churchill continued, I firmly believe that it will be a blessing also to all the inhabitants of this country without distinction of race and religion. This last blessing depends greatly upon you. Winston Churchill. Dr. Poole is called back to New York to become the rabbi in 1922. And there is a newspaper article about it. He has a long career here at Sareth Israel. He becomes, right when he comes back immediately in the 1920s, he's the president of Young Judea, and he does not give up his Zionist attitudes or his Zionist work. In the 1930s, his wife, Tamar de Sola Poole, becomes the president of the New York chapter of Hadassah and later president of all of Hadassah Hospital, the Hadassah Women's Organization, and is very influential in raising money for Israel, both him and her. And they were zocheh to actually witness the creation of the state of Israel. This is a picture of them in 1947 at the UN meeting, tallying the votes for the creation of the partition plan creating the state of Israel. You can see a pretty great smile on their faces, pretty emotional moment that some photographer was able to capture right there at the UN. And so I just going to leave it with this. I don't have any great message other than to say that today we are facing terrible times, war in Israel. Everyone that I know is somehow connected in some fashion, is paying attention, close attention, and praying for the safety of the soldiers, the safety of their relatives, the safety of our brethren in Israel. And that is not, unfortunately for us, it's not something new. Every situation is unique. This is not the same as any situation in the past, but on some level, the conflict has been going on for so long that even Dr. Poole experienced it in 1920 at the very start of the Haganah, and now we are praying for soldiers in the IDF today. I don't know. I want to leave you on some kind of happier note. I don't know what that should be, but I think we can end with prayer. We can say Tehillim, which is what we're doing in Sheretz Israel every day. Many synagogues doing the same thing. And that's what we're going to do. The title of my class today comes from Psalm 120, which we're going to read, and then we'll read Psalm 121, which will probably be a little more familiar to most of you. So we'll start with Psalm 120. Shir hamangalot el Adonai b'tzarat li karati vayanganeni Adonai hatzila nafshi misefat sheker milashon remia ma yitein lecha u'ma yosif lach lashon remia chitzei gibor shinunim nim gachale retamim Oy yali ki garti meshech shachanti im ngahole kedar rabat shachena la nafshi nim sonei shalom ani shalom vechi adaber hema la milchama shir la mangalot esa ngenai el heharim me'ayin yabong ezri Ngezri mengim Adonai, Moshe shamayim va'aretz, al yitein lamot raglecha, al yanum shomerecha, hine lo yanum velo yishan, shomer Yisrael, Adonai shomerecha, Adonai tzilecha, al yad yeminecha, yomam hashemesh lo yakecha, v'yareach balayla, Adonai yishmorcha mikol rang, yishmor et nafshecha, Adonai yishmor tzeitecha uboecha mengata v'ngad golam. And so it is we pray for the safety and security of all our loved ones in Israel, and may we soon see more peaceful days, and our classes won't be full of this kind of topic. We'll have other topics to talk about in the future. And so with that, I'm going to stop the recording and allow everyone to talk to each other. Let's see if I can get that done here.
Can you explain why he's called former rabbi?
He left. He quit Sheretz Israel to move to Israel and work for the Balfour Commission. And in fact, what I didn't show you, I had considered putting it in 1922, a few months before they asked Rabbi Poole to come back to New York and be the rabbi here at Sheretz Israel. They asked someone else. They asked Herbert S. Goldstein, the rabbi of the institutional synagogue. He came, he gave a speech here, he gave a sermon, he was liked. The board asked him to come, and he turned them down.
So how long was the first stint as a rabbi?
He began in the end of 1907, December of 1907, and then he 1919 he goes to Israel. Comes back in 1922, and then he's the rabbi, and I mean he becomes rabbi emeritus in the 60s or the late 50s, but he is essentially the rabbi until his death in 1970.
So he came back specially to be the rabbi.
Yeah.
Where did he get his semicha?
So that's a longer question that he studied in Jews College. He studied with his father. I'm getting confused with Henry Paramendes. He studied in Jews College. He studied in Hildesheim, in Germany. And then he came to America, and he had private semicha also. And then he also got semicha. He was awarded more honorifically a semicha from Skokie Yeshiva. So he has a couple of different. He was awarded Yadin Yadin by Skokie Yeshiva in the 1950s. He has a bunch of
Yeah.
He, he had an English accent.
very much so.
I think
There are recordings of him. I don't have them for you. That he doesn't. There he has a very strong British accent. Some people on this call will remember his voice. Okay. I forgot to do this.